It started like any other quiet Monday afternoon in a small American town. Blue skies, kids walking home from school, mail carriers making their rounds, and neighbors raking leaves into neat little piles. But behind one weathered front door on the corner of Sycamore Lane, something was very, very wrong. Officers were dispatched for what they thought was just a routine welfare check, a simple knock, maybe a quick conversation, and then back to the station for coffee. But within minutes of arrival, those officers would find themselves staring into the heart of a nightmare so disturbing, so deeply unsettling, that seasoned detectives would later say it changed the way they approached every call thereafter. This wasn't just another check-in. This was a doorway to something evil, something buried for far too long. And the moment that front door creaked open, it was clear. This wasn't going to be normal. This was a crime scene soaked in horror. The kind of case that burrows under your skin and lingers long after the headlines fade. Stay with me, because in the next few moments, you're going to discover the chilling truth hidden inside that house. And by the end of this story, you'll understand why this case still haunts an entire community to this day. Now, I know you've clicked on this video because something in the title stopped you in your tracks. Maybe it was the word horror, or the thought of an ordinary welfare check revealing something so terrible it defies belief. Maybe you're into true crime, unsolved mysteries, or shocking police discoveries. Or maybe you're just curious because deep down, we all wonder what goes on behind closed doors in houses that look just like ours. Let me be clear right now. You will get the answer you came here for. I'm not going to dangle clues and leave you hanging. I will take you into the heart of this story, peel back the layers, and show you exactly what happened, piece by terrifying piece. But in order for this to hit with full force, you need to hear everything. You need to feel what the officers felt. You need to know the people involved. And I promise, by the time we get to the end, you're going to see the full picture. But you're also going to wish you hadn't. Let me ask you something personal. Have you ever felt like something was off with someone you knew, but you couldn't quite explain it? Maybe it was a neighbor who rarely came outside. A house where the curtains never moved. A silence that was just too perfect. That's where we begin. Because the people on Sycamore Lane had those same feelings. They had suspicions. But no one ever did anything. Until it was too late. That's the psychological hook of the story. The eerie realization that sometimes evil doesn't come charging through the front door. Sometimes it just waits, quietly behind it. That's what makes this case so disturbing. It's not about someone snapping in a moment of rage. It's about secrets, silence, and the horrifying things that can exist in the everyday. This could have been your street. It could have been your neighbor. That's the connection. That's why you need to hear this. Now, let me introduce you to the woman who started it all, Linda Moore. 67 years old, retired schoolteacher, loved by everyone on her block. Always wore purple. Had a garden full of lavender. The kind of woman who dropped off cookies for new neighbors and sent Christmas cards even if you hadn't spoken to her in months. But one day, Linda stopped calling. Stopped answering her door. Stopped showing up at church. Her car sat untouched in the driveway for days, leaves collecting on the windshield like a quiet warning. No social media updates. No text messages. Nothing. Her best friend, Martha, who lived just a few doors down, called the police, worried something had happened. She just wanted someone to check in. Just to make sure Linda hadn't slipped in the shower or fallen asleep with the stove on. No one was thinking murder. Not yet. But within an hour of that call, Sycamore Lane would become the epicenter of one of the most disturbing investigations in recent memory. The first officer to arrive was Deputy Jason Ruiz. Young, sharp, full of energy. He'd only been with the department for 2 years but was known for going above and beyond on every call. He walked up the steps of Linda's porch, noticed a strange smell in the air, something metallic, something off. The front door was locked, but there was no sign of forced entry. He knocked. No answer. Knocked again, this time louder. Still nothing. He radioed in for backup, and what happened next has been etched into his memory forever. Once the second unit arrived, they made entry through the back. What they found wasn't just shocking. It was unnatural. The air inside the house was heavy, rancid. There was food rotting on the table. A TV still playing old soap operas on mute. And then silence. A silence so thick, so unnatural. It almost screamed. And when they found Linda, they knew immediately this was no accident. This was not a fall, not a stroke. What they found was the beginning of a nightmare. I won't describe everything in detail just yet because, trust me, it gets worse. But let me say this. Linda wasn't alone in that house. And she hadn't been for some time. What officers uncovered was a twisted blend of neglect, obsession, and calculated cruelty. This wasn't just one person losing their mind. This was methodical, intentional, and what horrified everyone the most was who had been responsible. Because as the investigation unfolded, what police discovered in the basement, in the attic, and hidden in boxes under the floorboards revealed a far darker truth than anyone was prepared for. This wasn't just one tragic loss. This was a story of control, of manipulation, and of a double life so convincing that no one saw it coming. This is why you need to stay with me. Because what's buried inside this case will shock you. The evidence that investigators would later find included detailed journals, handwritten blueprints, voice recordings, and even time-stamped photographs. The kind of material that, in any other context, would seem like the work of a deranged fiction writer. But this wasn't fiction. It was real. Every page, every recording, every horrifying detail. And as detectives worked their way through Linda's house, they began to realize this wasn't just about her. There were others, clues pointing to something bigger, something that had gone unnoticed for years. And the more they uncovered, the more dangerous the situation became. Because the person responsible for all of this,
he was still out there,
watching, waiting. What makes this story hit so hard is the emotional ripple effect it left behind. A quiet neighborhood torn apart. Families afraid to go to sleep at night. People questioning everything they thought they knew about their friends, their block, even their own judgment. That's the power of this case. It's not just true crime. It's psychological. It gets inside your head and forces you to ask, would I have seen the signs? Could this have happened next door to me? Or worse, in my own home? So, to everyone watching right now, I want you to know, I'm going to take you through every step of this case. One unexpected name kept coming up. Alex Parson, a local handyman she'd hired to do odd jobs around the house. 34 years old, no criminal record, friendly to everyone, or so it seemed. Several neighbors remembered seeing his truck parked in front of Linda's house at all hours. One claimed they saw him there past midnight more than once. Another swore she overheard a loud argument through the open windows, Linda's voice sharp and panicked, Alex's deeper and strangely calm. And yet, when questioned, Alex was cooperative. Almost too cooperative. He claimed he hadn't seen Linda in over a week and acted genuinely shocked at the news. But something in his demeanor felt rehearsed. He never asked what had happened, just kept insisting that he had nothing to do with it. The officers took note of that. Most innocent people ask what went wrong. Alex didn't seem curious, just careful. And then there was the matter of the neighborhood watch group. A tight-knit, almost obsessive collection of residents who prided themselves on knowing every little detail about every person on the block. They claimed they had seen no one suspicious, nothing out of place. But when detectives reviewed Linda's home's security footage from the week before she disappeared, one face stood out. Daryl Evans, a neighborhood watch captain known for patrolling late at night with a flashlight and a walkie-talkie. The footage showed him approaching Linda's porch around 3 a.m., well outside the usual patrol times. He wasn't carrying his walkie-talkie. He didn't knock. He just stood there, motionless, watching the house for nearly 7 minutes before turning and walking away. When confronted, Daryl brushed it off as a glitch in memory, said he must have been checking on a light or responding to a false alarm. But his story didn't add up. No calls had been made. No alarms triggered. And when asked why he didn't log the incident, Daryl got quiet. Very quiet. As detectives dug deeper, they began to feel like they were circling a drain of confusion and deceit. Every lead opened a new layer of questions. Every character introduced seemed plausible, yet suspicious. The handyman, the ex-fiancé, the brother, the watchman, all had motives. All had opportunity. but nothing concrete connected them. And that's when forensic techs made a discovery that blew the case wide open. Inside the walls of Linda's bedroom, literally hidden between the drywall and insulation, they found something chilling. A small recorder, battery-powered, still running. It had captured hours of audio, and what it revealed changed everything. Not just because of what was said, but because of the voice that was speaking. The tone, the whispers, and the disturbing realization that Linda hadn't been alone in that house for a very long time. And yet, despite this terrifying new evidence, one truth remained just out of reach. Who was controlling who? Was Linda a target? Or had she known more than she ever let on? Had she uncovered something she shouldn't have? Or had someone from her past come back to finish what they'd started? The deeper this story goes, the harder it becomes to separate fact from manipulation. And just when you think you know who to trust, something else surfaces. A new piece of evidence. A new contradiction. A new name whispered in the dark. Stay with me, because we haven't even reached the most disturbing part yet. The answers are coming, but so are more lies, more confusion, and a truth so twisted, it'll leave you questioning everything you think you know about justice, motive, and the human mind. Would you like me to continue from here with the next 5,000-word section, where detectives begin decoding the audio tape, unravel hidden secrets in the house, and stumble upon a horrifying connection no one expected? Absolutely. Here's the next part of your story, continuing from where we left off. This section will escalate the tension by introducing critical obstacles, an unsettling betrayal, and a chilling twist, all while maintaining an immersive, psychologically driven tone with trending keywords tailored for a US-based YouTube true crime audience. The audio recorder recovered from inside Linda Moore's bedroom wall became the heartbeat of the investigation. Detectives, forensic analysts, and even FBI profilers took turns listening to hours of grainy, muffled playback, hoping to catch anything, a name, a threat, a slip-up. The first few hours were eerily quiet, filled mostly with the hum of the house and Linda's soft footsteps. Occasionally, she would talk to herself in hushed, strained whispers, almost as if she was trying to keep herself calm. Then, late into the third hour, the recordings shifted. A different voice emerged.
Male. Low. Calm.
The words were cryptic, but the tone was unmistakable. "You know why I'm here," he said. "You've always known. Don't pretend you forgot." It sent a chill through the entire room. Before investigators could analyze the entire audio, the unthinkable happened. The recorder, which had been placed in a secure evidence locker at the station, vanished. No sign of forced entry. No tampering with the logs. It simply disappeared. Security footage showed nothing unusual. No one unauthorized had accessed the room. The only ones with clearance were 3 officers, and all 3 passed polygraphs. But someone, somehow, had managed to get past layers of security to erase the one piece of raw, unfiltered truth. This wasn't just an inside job. It was a warning. The lead detective on the case, Michael Danner, had handled dozens of complex cases, but this one was unraveling in ways that made no sense. He started receiving anonymous notes, slipped under his windshield, left on his desk with no surveillance to track the drop-off. They were always typed on plain, white paper with no fingerprints. And the message was always the same: stop digging. At first, he thought it was a prank, maybe someone trying to stir up panic. But then came the 4th note, the one that included a photograph of his teenage daughter walking home from school. That's when Danner realized this case was bigger than Linda Moore. It was a web of secrets that someone was willing to kill to protect. In the meantime, Linda's old friend and former coworker, Joan Halbert, stepped forward. She hadn't spoken to police earlier because she was out of town during the week of Linda's disappearance. But when she returned and heard the news, she immediately reached out. Joan claimed that Linda had confided in her just a few months ago about someone from her past reappearing. She wouldn't say who, just that it was a shadow she thought she left behind decades ago. Joan said Linda had started acting paranoid, locking windows twice, sleeping with the lights on, even refusing to go near her basement. But what disturbed Joan the most was what Linda said the last time they spoke. "They buried the truth with her, but now they want to bury me too." That cryptic comment sent investigators down a new path, one that led back over 40 years to a small rural town in Kentucky, where a missing persons case eerily similar to Linda's had occurred. A young woman named Cecilia Barlow vanished under mysterious circumstances. Her last known contact was with a man named Henry Whitlow. Yes, the same ex-fiancée Linda had been involved with. At the time, no charges were filed. Henry had an alibi. But what if that alibi had been manufactured? And what if Cecilia's disappearance wasn't an isolated incident, but part of a long, buried pattern? The kind of weight that isn't caused by fatigue, but by a sixth sense screaming something was wrong. The rehab facility loomed ahead of him like a haunted cathedral, tall iron gates, dark windows, and a silence that seemed too controlled, too complete. It wasn't just a building meant for healing. It looked like a place designed to keep secrets locked away. The air was thick, humid, and buzzing with invisible tension as he flashed his badge to the security guard, who barely acknowledged him before pressing the buzzer to let him in. Everything about this place felt staged, like the silence was part of the show. The further he walked through the halls, the more he noticed the details, the vacant stares of the patients, the hurried glances of the staff, and how not a single nameplate was mounted on any of the doors. This wasn't just a medical facility. It was a vault. He requested records for the alias Laura Miles, only to be told the patient had checked out weeks ago. But when he asked to review security footage from the time she allegedly left, he was met with resistance. "Our system automatically deletes video files every 14 days, the administrator claimed with a tight-lipped smile that didn't reach her eyes. Danner left the facility without answers, but something inside him screamed that he was being watched. He caught his reflection in the glass of his car window, but for a split second, he thought he saw movement behind him. When he turned, nothing was there, just the shadows of the trees swaying slightly in the wind. Still, the feeling didn't leave. In fact, it only got stronger. Later that night, while reviewing his case notes at home, his phone buzzed, not with a call, but with a video file sent from an unknown number. He opened it cautiously. The grainy footage looked like it had been taken through a surveillance lens, and it showed someone walking down a dim hallway. At first, Danner didn't recognize the location until the person turned slightly and the camera caught their face in the flickering light. It was him. The footage was from inside the rehab center. He was being watched the entire time. And then came the final second of the video, a still image, time-stamped just 30 minutes earlier. His apartment door. A shadowy figure stood in front of it, facing the peephole. No face, no movement, just stillness, like they were waiting to be let in. Danner didn't sleep that night. Instead, he packed a go-bag and relocated to a safe house without telling anyone. Paranoia set in quickly. Every car that slowed near him felt suspicious. Every unmarked envelope, every disconnected call made his pulse spike. But the fear wasn't just for himself. It was for the people around him. The next morning, he called Joanne's sister, hoping to trace any possible location she might have run to, only to find out that the sister never received the voicemails Joanne allegedly left. Someone had either intercepted them or faked the entire call log. And then, it got worse. His partner, Detective Greer, didn't show up for their scheduled debrief. She wasn't answering her phone. Her apartment was locked from the inside. But when the team broke in, they found her badge, service weapon, and phone on the kitchen counter, along with a post-it stuck to the mirror that read, "He told me to stop. I didn't listen. I'm sorry." That was when Danner realized this wasn't just a case anymore. It was a trap, and he'd walked right into it. The pieces had been moving long before he arrived. Someone was controlling the narrative, predicting his every move, and eliminating people close to him. He questioned every decision he'd made since the welfare check that started it all. Had the flash drive been planted? Was Richard Keene luring him into a rabbit hole of distraction? And what if the real answer wasn't about who had disappeared, but who never truly existed in the first place? The line between real and orchestrated had completely blurred. Linda Moore, Patricia Sutterfield, Joanne Halbert. What if one of them wasn't who they claimed to be at all? Or worse, what if they were all playing different parts of the same twisted story, using aliases, identities, and trauma to disguise something far more sinister? And now, with Greer gone, with threats arriving right at his doorstep, Danner knew this wasn't about solving a mystery anymore. It was about surviving it. The deeper he dug, the louder the warning bells rang in his head. But then, as he reviewed a series of deleted voicemails from an encrypted backup, one caught his ear. It was distorted and brief, but clear enough to understand. "Stop chasing ghosts, Danner. You don't want to end up like the others." The message wasn't just a warning. It was a threat. And it meant whoever was behind this knew exactly where he was, what he was doing, and how far he was willing to go. That night, someone tried to break into the safe house. The motion sensors went off at 3:12 a.m. By the time he reached the front door, the figure was gone. But on the doormat was a Polaroid photo. The same rehab hallway. His silhouette. And behind him, blurred but visible, was a figure that hadn't been there before. Long hair, pale face, and eyes locked directly onto the camera. Not a ghost. A person. Watching him from the shadows. So now the question wasn't just who was following him, but how long they'd been there. And whether it was already too late. Want me to continue from here, with the next breakthrough he uncovers, and what finally drives him to confront the person pulling the strings. Detective Danner sat motionless in the dim light of the safe house, the Polaroid still clenched in his hand, heart pounding in his ears as he stared at the ghostly figure behind him in the photo. Every instinct told him he was being played, manipulated by someone who knew him better than he knew himself. But the unraveling didn't stop there, because just when he thought he was beginning to grasp the depth of the deception, everything flipped in a way he never saw coming. His phone rang again. This time, it wasn't a blocked number or a corrupted voicemail. It was a name he hadn't seen in months, Richard Keene. The man who had supposedly killed himself. The man whose death had triggered this entire nightmare. Danner answered with a breath caught in his throat, expecting static or maybe silence. But the voice on the other end was calm, alive, and terrifyingly familiar. "I warned you to leave it alone," Richard said, his tone cold but without malice. "You should have let the past die." Danner's mind reeled. Either someone was playing an elaborate trick, or the entire foundation of the case was a lie. Richard Keene's autopsy had been signed off, his funeral held, and a death certificate filed. But now here he was, speaking as if he'd never left. The realization landed like a gut punch. What if Richard had faked his own death? What if everything, from the staged suicide to the flash drive and the haunting trail of false leads, was part of something far bigger than a missing persons case? What if this had never been about finding Joanne, Linda, or Patricia, but about luring Danner in? Richard's voice continued, calm and calculating. "You weren't supposed to be the one to follow this far. But I know you, Danner. You don't let go. That's your flaw." Everything began to shift in his mind. The flash drive, the blurry footage, the broken voicemail chains, it wasn't evidence. Detective Greer, who had supposedly vanished, who had left behind an eerie apology note, was alive. And not just alive, but involved. The emotional twist hit hard. Danner had trusted her, leaned on her, and confided in her. And now she was tangled up in the very web he'd been trying to escape. But her voice sounded broken, worn down by fear and guilt. "I thought I could stop him. I thought if I kept feeding him information, he'd let her go." The betrayal ran deep, but so did the truth finally surfacing. Danner realized something monumental. This wasn't about the women who had gone missing. This was about the people left behind. The people who were pushed, threatened, and manipulated until they became pawns. It was psychological warfare at its most brutal. Richard hadn't vanished into darkness. He built it around him and pulled others in like a vortex. But then Greer said something that made Danner's blood run cold. "He didn't do this alone. There's someone else. Someone you wouldn't expect." That one sentence shifted the earth beneath him. A second player? Someone inside the department? Someone closer? The people who'd vouched for him, who helped process the evidence, who managed the case files, any one of them could have been involved. That would explain the deleted footage, the altered voicemail logs, the sudden disappearance of records. Danner suddenly recalled a moment from 2 weeks earlier, an offhand comment made by his supervisor about how some of the case files were accidentally purged during a system update. It had felt off at the time, but he'd let it go. Now it screamed conspiracy. As the call ended with a promise from Greer to try and escape, Danner felt something shift inside him. Not fear this time, but fury. He'd been lied to, betrayed by people he cared about, manipulated by a man the world thought was dead. And now he was being told there was another player, someone who had helped stage all of this from within. Everything he thought he knew, every assumption, every piece of evidence, every shred of trust was crumbling. Even his own memory of events came into question. Had he been led to that flash drive? Was the entire chain of events from the beginning designed to look like a mystery when it was actually a carefully constructed illusion? But as Danner began piecing together the final connection, another bombshell dropped. His computer screen flickered to life without warning, and a video began playing. It wasn't sent, it wasn't downloaded, it was just there. A grainy feed showing the inside of a dark room. A woman sat tied to a chair, bruised but alive. Danner's heart stopped as he recognized her face.
It was Joanne. She was still alive.
And just before the video cut to black, a figure stepped into the frame. Not Richard Keene, but someone else. Someone Danner knew. Someone he'd never, not for a second, suspected. Everything he believed about the case shattered in that instant. Want me to continue with Danner's confrontation with this mysterious second player, and how the real motive behind the entire case finally starts to unravel. The weight of what Detective Danner had just witnessed didn't fully sink in until long after the screen went black, until the echo of his own breath filled the silence of the room. Joanne was alive, bruised and terrified, but breathing. And the figure who stepped into the frame, the person who had orchestrated, concealed, and manipulated the entire investigation, wasn't just someone Danner recognized. It was someone he trusted. Someone he considered a friend. Captain Ray Mercer. The man who'd mentored him, vouched for him at the academy, covered for him during his first years on the force, and stood by him through every dead-end case and late-night breakdown. It wasn't just betrayal, it was devastation. And now, the reality that had been clawing at the edges of his mind finally broke through. Nothing about this investigation had ever been random. From the moment he responded to the initial welfare check, he had been placed on a track with no exit. A carefully laid path built to break him down and test exactly how far he was willing to go for the truth. When Danner confronted Mercer later that night, it wasn't with a team or backup. It was alone, off the record, in the same abandoned warehouse where he'd once met confidential informants, a place where no badge or surveillance camera would protect him. The air was cold, and Mercer was already waiting, leaning against the frame of a rusted door like he had all the time in the world. The smile he offered was hollow, familiar in the worst possible way. There were no pretenses. No drawn guns or shouting. Just the terrible understanding between two men who knew the same game and had now found themselves on opposite sides of it. Mercer didn't deny anything. He didn't flinch when Danner demanded to know why. He just handed over a small envelope and said, almost gently, "This is everything you need to make it go away." Inside the envelope was a burner phone with a pre-recorded video, time-stamped and damning, showing Joanne alive and locked in what looked like an underground facility. Mercer's voice played over the footage.
"Here's the deal, Mike.
Walk away. No more digging, no more pushing. You disappear for a while. Let this whole thing fade. We'll get her back home. We'll stage it like a kidnapping, clean and tidy. But if you keep coming at this, if you go public, if you even breathe one word to the press, she disappears for real. No body. No closure." That was the choice. The truth or her life. His career or her death. There was no middle ground. Danner wanted to rage, to scream, to pull out his weapon and end it right there, but deep down he knew it wouldn't matter. Mercer wasn't working alone. He never had been. He was just the face of something larger, a network built to protect secrets older than Danner's entire career. Linda Moore, Patricia Sutterfield, the mysterious disappearances, the scrubbed files, the doctored footage, it was all part of something bigger, something insidious. But the emotional cost of moving forward was now fully laid bare. If he pushed, if he exposed the truth, someone innocent would pay the price. Again. Back at the safe house, Danner stared at the envelope for hours. He listened to the video over and over, searching for any hint of Joanne's location. There was nothing. No distinctive sounds, no markings, no identifiable architecture. It was a ghost recording, meant only to haunt him. He reached out to Greer again, who was still hiding, feeding him updates through encrypted messages. She told him what he already feared. Mercer had been in control from the start. Every movement Danner made was mirrored, countered, and fed into a plan he had no part in creating. And now, even Greer's loyalty was in question. How much had she known? How long had she been playing both sides? The weight of isolation began to crush him. His colleagues were either involved, indifferent, or too scared to act. His only allies were ghosts and shadows. His instincts told him to go public, leak the videos, get the media involved, force the truth into the open. But doing that would sign Joanne's death warrant. And possibly Greer's too. So he sat in the dark with two truths pounding in his skull. The people in power were untouchable, and the longer he waited, the closer Joanne came to being just another name on a forgotten case file. That night, he received another message. This time it wasn't a video. It was a single sentence, typed in plain text. The next photo won't be a warning. It wasn't just a threat. It was a declaration. The countdown had started. And now Danner had to choose. Expose the system and risk killing the last innocent person left, or walk away and let the truth rot beneath layers of silence and fear. For the first time in his life, he didn't know which path was right. But what if the truth he thought he was chasing wasn't even the truth at all? What if Mercer wasn't the final boss, but just another puppet? What if Joanne's kidnapping wasn't a consequence of the investigation, but the reason for it? Want me to continue with what happens when Danner tries to trace the origin of Joanne's video, and what secret he uncovers that changes everything again? 2 of 2. Danner had always thought he was chasing one man, one monster in the shadows pulling the strings behind the horror he'd uncovered. But as he stared at the coordinates Greer had just sent him, buried beneath layers of encryption and traced back through an international server, he realized the rabbit hole he was falling into didn't have a bottom. The location pointed not to some abandoned warehouse or secret room beneath a city building, but to an old corporate campus deep in the outskirts of Virginia, once a research facility, now off-grid and decommissioned. A place with no official records, no public access, and no explanation for why Joanne's voice had echoed through that exact set of coordinates, hidden in the audio waveform of the video Mercer had left him. This wasn't just corruption anymore. It was industrial, weaponized, and funded. He didn't tell Greer where he was going. He couldn't. Not anymore. Something in his gut had shifted after their last conversation. She knew too much, anticipated too much. And that text she sent earlier, the one with Mercer's name and supposed confession, it read too polished, too perfect. Like it had been written for him. Not by her, but for her. Scripted. And once that seed was planted, it grew quickly. He started replaying their conversations, dissecting her pauses, her word choices, her calculated silences. Greer had always been his lifeline in the shadows, but now, she felt more like the tether keeping him from climbing out. And as much as it broke him to admit it, she was the only one who had access to the same files Mercer did. She was the only one who had ever told him exactly what he needed to hear, exactly when he needed to hear it. As he approached the facility in the dead of night, every fiber of his body screamed that he wasn't just walking into a trap. He was walking into the center of something far more orchestrated than he'd ever imagined. The building itself was eerie.
Still.
Overgrown vines crept up its brick frame, windows shattered or boarded. But the moment he stepped past the front gate, motion sensors clicked to life. Cameras rotated. And the silence became too perfect to be natural. Danner pushed forward anyway. He had to know. And what he found inside was worse than anything he'd allowed himself to imagine. It wasn't just Joanne. She was there, yes, barely conscious, hooked to and for, a shell of the woman she once was, but she wasn't alone. In the same hallway were 4 other people, some barely teenagers, others adults. all in similar states, being kept alive but hidden, monitored, recorded. And the monitors themselves didn't belong to law enforcement or private security. They bore the branding of a tech company he recognized instantly. Allpoint Systems, a firm that had been awarded multiple federal contracts for AI surveillance, data mining, and biometric research. Danner had seen their name in passing before, on budget reports, grant proposals, internal memos, but never imagined their reach extended into black site human experiments. He barely had time to process the horror before a door slammed shut behind him. From the shadows, a voice emerged, not Mercer's, but another familiar one. Deputy Chief Ellen Raines. She stepped into the low light with her hands raised slightly, as if to soothe the skittish animal. "You weren't supposed to get this far, Mike," she said softly. "But now that you have, you deserve to know the truth." The betrayal was nuclear. Raines had vouched for him from the start, shielded him when others tried to pull him off the case, warned him about Mercer. But it had all been misdirection. She wasn't trying to protect him. She was trying to direct him, shape the narrative. And now, cornered in a facility that shouldn't exist, standing among the victims of something that felt less like a cover-up and more like a human testing program, Danner finally understood the scale of what he was fighting. This wasn't just about one missing woman. It was about dozens, hundreds, people with no families, no digital footprint, targets chosen for their invisibility and used to train something far more dangerous than artificial intelligence. Raines explained, calmly, how this all started after a Department of Defense initiative was quietly shut down years ago. The technology was too unstable, too unpredictable, until private investors stepped in and restructured the mission into something more palatable. They began with psychological profiling, then memory manipulation, then synthetic learning based on trauma response patterns. Victims weren't just being held, they were being studied, fed stimuli, monitored, their reactions uploaded in real time to neural networks being trained for law enforcement, military, and, in the darkest corners of the project, crowd control. "And Joanne?" Danner whispered, his voice shaking. "She was never random," Raines replied. "She was selected because of you. Because we needed to see how a moral agent reacts when pushed beyond regulation. When the system fails and instinct takes over. And you, Mike, you gave us a perfect arc. Every time." He didn't even feel his fists clench. Didn't realize his breathing had turned shallow, fast, ragged. They had used him. Every decision he thought was his own. Every break in the case, every clue dropped into his lap, had been engineered. He wasn't just the hunter. He was the experiment. Outside, the facility's lights flared to life. Drones hovered overhead. It wasn't just a facility anymore. It was a stage. And Danner knew he had only minutes before this place disappeared off the grid again, taking Joanne and the others with it. He had no plan, no backup, and for the first time, no idea who the enemy truly was. But something deep inside him burned. Rage, grief, and something more dangerous, clarity, because now he understood the real reason why they let him get this far. They didn't expect him to survive what came next. Want me to continue with how Danner tries to rescue Joanne while exposing the entire system, and what horrifying final twist reveals who's truly behind it all? Danner had always believed that the truth would feel like justice. That the moment the final piece of the puzzle locked into place, he'd feel a rush of clarity, maybe even peace. But as he stood in the operations room at the heart of the underground facility, screens lining the walls, each one flashing biometric data, trauma response metrics, and facial recognition logs spanning back years, what he felt instead was sickening dread. Every question that had haunted him, every lead that had pulled him deeper into this waking nightmare, was right here in front of him. And at the center of it all stood the last person he expected. In fact, he smiled. Calm. Detached. As though none of this was real. "You think this is about murder," he said, stepping forward slowly. "You think it's about grief. But it's not. It's about control. About designing a future where chaos is predictable. Do you know what real power is, detective? It's not money. It's not fear. It's being able to trigger a riot with a whisper. To push society into collapse or salvation, using nothing but data. The words hit like a slow-burning fuse. Danner realized the whole operation wasn't just about training artificial intelligence, it was about psychological engineering. By capturing people like Linda, Joanne, and even Cecilia, they were compiling years of emotional mapping. They weren't building a surveillance state, they were building a manipulation state. Algorithms that could anticipate human behavior with terrifying accuracy. Systems that could suppress uprisings, sway elections, erase public memory. The victims were collateral, necessary inputs in a larger equation to control not just people, but thought itself. Barlow gestured toward one of the larger monitors, where a looping video played on mute. Danner recognized himself on the screen, moments from earlier in the investigation caught by hidden cameras. Private conversations. Silent breakdowns. His grief weaponized. "You are the perfect subject," Barlow said. "A man broken by loss. Driven by guilt. So desperate for meaning that we barely had to nudge you. You built your own narrative. You created your own enemies. We just gave you enough breadcrumbs to follow." Danner's grip tightened on the weapon, but he didn't fire. His heart was a chaos of betrayal and fury. How many of his decisions had truly been his own? How many of his memories had been shaped by this machine, this program, this lie? He looked at Joanne, still bound in the corner, her eyes pleading, not for herself, but for him. She was awake now, more aware than he'd seen her in days. Whatever sedatives they'd used had worn off, and now she was fully conscious of her surroundings. Of him.
Of the choice he was about to make.
Barlow turned, punching a code into a panel beside the screen. One by one, the monitors flickered, revealing feeds of city streets, news broadcasts, even protests forming in real time. The system was already online. "You can kill me, detective." But the system runs itself now. It learns.
Adapts.
Even grief like yours is just a data point. And then came the twist Danner didn't see coming. A low beep echoed from a monitor behind him. He turned to see a new file open on the screen, labeled Control Subject, Greer Eleanor. He froze. The file showed timestamps, psychological evaluations, even command logs tied to conversations they'd had. Greer wasn't just complicit. She was engineered. A synthetic personality layered over a real one, implanted to gain trust, gather information, and redirect Danner anytime he got too close. She was part of the experiment. But worse, so was he. A control variable. Their interactions weren't friendship. They were programming exercises. The room began to tremble. Danner didn't notice the blinking red light at first, the silent countdown. But Barlow did. "She triggered the failsafe," he said with a chuckle. "Maybe she's not completely synthetic after all." Smoke began to rise from the server banks. One by one, files began purging. Audio logs. Experiment footage. Victim profiles. The entire network was crashing. Greer had somehow injected a virus into the system, her final act of rebellion, or maybe redemption. But it wouldn't stop the building from imploding in less than 3 minutes. Barlow lunged, trying to stop the purge. Danner fired once, wounding, not killing. Enough to drop him. Then he ran to Joanne, cutting her restraints as flames licked the walls behind them. They made it to the hallway just as the automated lockdown began, steel doors sliding down to trap the secrets forever. Danner dragged her through the emergency exit, the fire lighting the sky behind them like a second sun. Outside, as they stumbled into the woods, coughing and bloodied, Danner looked back at the burning facility and realized that justice wouldn't come from a courtroom or an arrest warrant. The system was gone. But the trauma wasn't. The truth he carried was now his alone. And as helicopters began circling overhead, too late to stop the collapse, a new message buzzed on the burner phone in his pocket. It simply read, "Run. They know everything." Because the twist wasn't just that Greer had been part of the machine. It was that she was the machine, and she'd just sacrificed herself to give Danner a shot at exposing it all. Unless she survived. Unless she's still watching. Unless the machine is still learning. Want me to write the final scene? Where Danner decides whether to run, fight, or vanish. The fire was long out, the smoke replaced by the thick hush of bureaucracy and denial. In the weeks that followed the destruction of the underground facility, Danner found himself caught in a strange space between truth and silence. There was no press conference, no headlines, no widespread outrage. The explosion was ruled an electrical failure at an off-grid research compound, and the handful of officials who tried to probe deeper found their efforts buried under red tape and conveniently missing files. The system hadn't just erased the evidence, it had buried the truth beneath 100 layers of plausible deniability. The very thing Danner fought so hard to uncover had been swallowed by the same machine he had tried to destroy. Still, something in him had shifted. He no longer felt like a man hunting ghosts. Now he was the ghost. Always watching. Always listening. Always waiting for the next fracture in the system to reveal itself. Joanne recovered slowly, not just physically, but emotionally. The trauma she'd endured, months of being experimented on, manipulated, drugged, couldn't be undone with hospital care or therapy sessions. But there was strength in her now, a quiet resolve that hadn't been there before. She and Danner rarely spoke about what happened. Some wounds were too deep to explain with words. But every now and then, she'd send him a note with just a single sentence, always cryptic, sometimes poetic, always loaded with subtext. They watch what we forget. Memory is not evidence. I saw Greer in a dream. Each message was a reminder that what they'd seen was real, and that healing didn't mean pretending it hadn't happened. It meant knowing it had and choosing to live anyway. Greer's disappearance was never officially acknowledged. Her apartment was cleared out, her digital footprint erased almost overnight. Danner tried to trace her, through old burner accounts, surveillance replays, anything, but she was gone. Whether she'd died in the fire, escaped into the shadows, or had simply been a projection from the very beginning, he never got a clear answer. But he still felt her presence. On quiet nights, when the streets outside his apartment were too still and his thoughts too loud, he'd catch a flicker on his laptop screen, a quick distortion in the webcam feed, a song she once played bleeding faintly from an anonymous email. It was as if she was still out there, still watching over the remnants of her rebellion, still deciding if he deserved to remember or forget. She had once told him that machines don't dream, but people do. And that dream, that human vulnerability, was the only thing that couldn't be programmed. Danner left the force quietly, without ceremony. Officially, he retired early due to stress. Unofficially, the department seemed all too eager to process his exit. They wanted him out before he could say too much. He moved to a remote coastal town, away from the grid, where cell towers were spotty and the ocean drowned out thoughts louder than the world. He wrote obsessively, not just reports or case notes, but letters to the victims' families, stories based on fragments of the truth, encrypted files disguised as fiction. He never named names, never drew the map too clearly, but he left trails, breadcrumbs, in case someone else came looking. Years passed. The world kept turning. Social media stayed loud. Conspiracies and trends replaced each other with every 24-hour cycle. But every now and then, buried deep in trending searches on YouTube, a name would resurface. Joanne Dale, Cecilia Barlow, Project Noesis. Videos claiming to expose hidden truths. Strange clips pulled from dark corners of the web, glitches, shadowy figures, whispering voices repeating the same phrase. The experiment never ended. Most people dismiss them as hoaxes, ARGs, digital scavenger hunts for bored teenagers. But those who really paid attention saw the patterns, the coding hidden in the metadata, the locations traced back to places like Coldwater, Vermont, or the exact coordinates where the facility once stood. Danner saw them too, and every time, it felt like a whisper from the past reminding him that it wasn't over. Then came the envelope. No return address. Just a single flash drive. On it, a short video, grainy, time-stamped with a date just 3 days in the future. It showed a crowd. Protesters. Police. Chaos. A woman stood at the center, holding a sign that read, "You're not paranoid if it's true." And beside her, almost unrecognizable, was Danner himself, older, harder, still watching. The footage hadn't happened yet. but it was coming. Just like Barlow had said, the machine learns. It adapts. It predicts. As he watched the video loop a second time, Danner felt that old, familiar chill at the base of his spine. Not fear. Not entirely. It was the weight of knowing that even after everything he'd done, even after all the secrets he'd burned to the ground, he was still part of something far larger. And maybe he always had been. Because the real twist wasn't that the truth had been hidden, it was that it had been hidden in plain sight. And now that it was out there, scattered in pieces across the digital world, it was only a matter of time before someone else picked it up. So Danner packed a bag, wrote one final note, and disappeared again. Not to run,
but to prepare.
because this time, the machine wasn't the only thing learning. And this time the world would be watching.